Welcome back to DJ Tutorials, and this is going to be part 6 of our tutorial series on the basic geometric object composition. So in this part, we're going to be going over lighting and sort of the basics of how to use lamps inside of the scene. And we're going to be using the EV engine to start off with. We are not going to be using the cycles engine or any of the other stuff for now. We're just going to be using the EV engine just so I can show you how everything sort of works. And we're going to start with a very basic setup with some simple lights, and then I'm going to show you how to make it that much better with an actual target that your lights are going to be directed towards, and you can kind of manipulate it from there using what's called an empty. So let's jump right into it. What we're going to be doing here is we're just going to be switching this to a rendered view. Now, one thing, just so I know that you guys have been most likely following, I have the screencast keys on over here, but it does sometimes cause some issues with the rendering. And I'm usually used to having the rendered view over here on the left. So it's going to be a little bit weird for me. I'm going to be actually using the right panel over here for the rendered look and the left panel here for moving things around. So forgive me if I get a little backwards, but it helps out because sometimes there's some weird artifacting that goes on with uh, these screencast keys. And just like before, I have the screencast keys on that I was just talking about, and I also have the keyboard down here so you can see the button presses and things like that, as well as the mouse and everything else. So in order to view this a little bit easier, what we're going to do is in the right panel here, we're actually going to make this easier for us to see what our composition looks like with the lighting. And what we're going to do is we're going to go up here to this little icon. It looks like two circles that are sort of interconnected. And what that's going to do is it's going to turn on and off our overlays over here. So if you left click that, you'll see that now we don't have those lines in the way, and all of the other overlay lines are now gone. So we can just see a more of a clear image here. Now in the left panel here, let's turn on the overlays by showing this because I actually turned it off up here. And we're going to talk about the lamp. And if we change this view over here on the right and we hold Z and we go up to the rendered view, this is what our current lighting looks like inside the scene. So, um, if you're brand new to this, this may look really awesome, but really this is a very primitive way of lighting the scene. And what we want to do is make this very dynamic. And what we're going to do is I'm going to explain to you how these different lights work, the basic lights that are in the scene. And then we're going to change them around and do a 3-point lighting setup in order to get this looking really nice. So if you take if you select on your lamp here, and you go over to the object properties, you'll see that if you drop down this little section here that says light, there's some different things to pick here. And the point light is really the most sort of primitive one. It's, if you can imagine it, kind of like a little light that's on a stick that's moving around the scene, and you can hold G to move it around, and you can see that in the EV engine, it's updated as we move it. So that's basically what the point light does. You can change the color of the light by selecting this color one here and changing this to whatever you'd like. I would not recommend doing that. I'm actually going to change this, go to the RGB and just type a bunch of ones in here to set it back to white. My recommendation is not to mess with color until you really understand how to light a scene properly using something like a 3-point lighting setup. And also you understand how to use what's called black body, which is a more realistic way of representing lighting in a scene. And then there's the power right here. And this is according to what it says right here, watts. You can left click and drag this and pull it all the way up. And now you're blowing out your scene. Or you can type it in, let's say we type in 500 and it's 500 watts. Specular is really just how bright that light is hitting the objects is. So you can see when you turn it down and up, you can see how it's hitting these objects. And then the radius, which is very important. And let's see, I will zoom in a bit here so you can see it. I'm going to turn the power up to 1500 so it's a little bit easier. So here is the lit surface. So this is a lighted area. This is the highlight. Here is the core shadow. And this right here is the reflected light right down here. If you can see that, there's like some reflected light on the bottom there. And if you look at how the shadow is being cast right here, the radius of your lamp has to do a bit with how the shadows are being calculated. So if I pop this up, if I click and drag it to the right, number one, in the viewport, you can see that the size is getting huge. And you can see that the way that the scene is being rendered, the highlight is getting softer because it's a larger lamp. And then if we look down here, you could see that the transition from the lit surface to the core shadow is a lot softer. And then if you look down at the bottom here, and there are some settings we could do to make this look a lot better, so don't worry about that. But just imagine here for a moment. Uh, if you look at that, the shadows are getting a lot softer. They're not as harsh as they were before. Now, if I take this radius and I go the other way, and I go all the way down to a 0.01, you can see that we have a much more sharp uh, shadow here, and the transition between the lit and unlit surfaces is a lot more sharp. So generally speaking, this is the way that you want to control the softness of the lighting and the shadows. And you have to kind of imagine the size being something like a very, very small light could be something like a very small halogen or LED light. And then something larger could be something, oops, that went to a 32 there. Let's just make that a 5 or something. Something like this could be just like a very large, bulb or something, or sometimes street lamps could be pretty large. So that's kind of what that's supposed to be there. The next thing we're going to do here, we're just going to change this back to a 0.2, which is the default. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the kinds of lamps that are in here. So you start off with the point, which is pretty, basic, as we talked about. And then you have what's called the sun, which is supposed to replicate a sun light that's in your scene. Now, I don't usually use these, and we're going to change the strength to 1. I don't normally use the sun lamps. I just think that there is a better way to represent sun lighting. But if you're doing an interior architectural visualization scene, this might be something that you use. But basically, once you have changed this to a sun lamp and you go down to a 1 strength, you can then change the angle by clicking and dragging this ball and directing it towards an object. You can rotate hitting R and just rotating it however you want. And you can also change the angle here, which sort of like changes the angle of the the in quotes sun to if it's directly overhead or something like that, you might have these more sharp shadows or something. And then as you go more and more angular, it's something like that you would see later on in the day where the shadows are more sort of like soft like this. Again, the EV engine is a raster engine, so it's not 100% accurate. It's sort of doing some approximations here, and we'll get into some of those details in the next part. But just trust me here. So the next thing that we have here is a spotlight, or the spot lamp. And let's change this power back to 1500. And you can see let's go back to the uh, camera view here. You can see that the uh, way that it's projecting the lighting now is based on this cone shape, and it's like what you would see from a spotlight. So if you click and drag the ball around, you can see that you are now targeting objects by using that. Just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to go to, I'm going to change this matte cap here, and I'm going to make it more of a softer color, just so it's easier on my eyes and easier to see some of the objects. So the same thing here, you can go to 7 if you want and hit R to rotate, hit 1 and you can rotate it this way. You can click and drag the yellow ball here to change where it's targeting, and we can change a couple of properties over here. The color's the same, power is the same, specular is the same, and the radius is pretty much the same. If you go higher, it will soften the shadows and everything, and if you go to a smaller value, it will make them a lot sharper. Now, the other thing we have here is the spot shape that you can see right here. And the size of the spot, if we look at the this left panel here, and you reduce the size here. And what I'm going to do just to make this easier to see, I'm going to hit Alt R, which will reset the rotation, and Alt G, which will reset its location in the scene. And I'm going to hit G, hit Z, and pull it up, just so that it's kind of like above this this sphere here. And if we take the size of the cone, where it says spot shape, and we pull it up, you can see that it's basically increasing how big that cone shape is. And if we reduce it, it's bringing it down to a smaller point. So let's pull this out, and you can actually see the cone if you do it like this. You can see it in the previewer here. Um, that's okay if you want to do that. I find it kind of in the way, so I usually turn it off. The next thing here is the blend. So if we make this size pretty large, and then we take the blend here and we pull it all the way to 0, you can see that there's now a very, very harsh line between the lit and the unlit areas. And if you pull the blend up, you can see that it's more and more diffused and a lot softer as far as where that edge is there. So that's the spotlight. Now let's look at the area light, which is actually a more, I would say, it tends to be a more accurate way of doing lighting if you're doing a studio light setup. So if you hit the area light button here, you'll see that the light becomes this really small thing. And if we zoom in on it with period, you'll see it's this square. And if we go over to our properties, you'll see the shape is rectangle. You can choose a square. Um, and if you hit S to scale this up, you're now making, oh, that went a little bit too big. You're now making the surface area larger. And funny enough, if you take a look over here in the right panel and you look at our shadows, if I scale up the size, you can see that it's making the shadows softer or harsher depending on the size of that plane. And you can control that here. You can change the size here, and you can change the power again here. All great. So what we're going to do for our basic lighting setup here is we're going to do a 3-point lighting setup. And what I mean by that is if I do a really quick search and I look up 3-point lighting and spell it correctly, you're going to find that you get a lot of examples. And if you look right here, this is a really good example of how to do a 3-point lighting setup where you have actual cameras. You have a subject here. Let's open this. That was the link. Let's open the image. So you can see here's your subject, and then over here you have a key light that's above the subject. You have your camera here, key light up here, fill light right here, and then you have a backlight that's back here. So 1, key light, 2, fill light, and 3, the backlight. And they all have certain relationships to the camera. Now, this will give you exact angles and all that. We're really not going to be doing exact angles. We're just going to be doing approximations to set up our scene. But you can see here that this is basically telling you exactly how you can set up your 3-point lighting setup. So we're going to take that into consideration when we're putting together our lights for this scene. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go to 7 here. I'm going to hit 7 here, and then I'm on this one. I'm going to go to the camera view. And I'm going to take this light. We're going to be using the area lights for this. And I'm going to hit G to grab it, move it over to the camera. And then I'm going to move it a bit away on the left over here. Now, it's not going to be exact, like I said. It's just going to be an approximation. And it's a little bit above. I'm going to grab it on Z and pull it just a little bit down. So it's above the camera, but not way too high and not way too low. And then I'm going to take this yellow ball here and I'm going to direct it to the blue sphere. And if you do that, you should have pretty much what you're seeing here, a lamp that's an area lamp that's pointed at this ball. Now, it's not enough to have the light just hitting it and just have 3 of them there. there's another bit of information according to this, and you can find a lot of examples like this, that we want to kind of pay attention to. And if you look over here at the key light, which let's actually name that right now. So with the lamp selected, I'm going to go up here to the light, double click, and I'm going to call this key, let's do undercase or lowercase, key light. And then we're going to set the power. So this has to be, generally speaking, what works the best is it needs to be a relatively small, the size of this, relatively small. So we get nice defined shadows. And needs to be the brightest light in our scene. So I'm going to change the power here to 2000. Okay. Then if we look here, there's the key light up here. That's 45 degrees to the left of the camera and up a little bit higher. Then over here, the fill light is down here a little bit. It's not as high as the key light. It's kind of down here. And it says right there 50%. So what that means is if I hit 7, I'm going to have this selected, duplicate it with Shift D. I'm going to drag it over to the other side of the camera. I'm going to take the ball and I'm going to drag it over to the sphere again. And then I'm going to take the power and I'm going to click over on the right here and I'm going to click forward, or I'm going to press forward slash, which is divide by 2. And that will give us exactly half of the power of our key light. And the next thing I want to do, because your fill light should really be softer than your key light, I'm going to increase the size here. So I'm going to drag this over. I'm holding shift and left click and dragging, and I'm going to make that, let's say, a 3.5. And you can type that in if you want. And a good way to check how our lights are doing is number 1, let's go to the world setting. So go to your world right here, and where it says strength, we're going to take this down to 0. Okay. And we're going to take the, let's actually call our fill light what it is. So double click here, call it fill light, and let's turn that one off. So here's our key light. You can see the very defined lines of the light and shadow. And then if we turn on our fill light, you could see that it's a lot softer. Hopefully you guys are all seeing that. It's much softer in how it's lighting our scene. And then together, we have a lighting setup that looks like this. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to pull this down a little bit. So I'm going to grab this on Z, pull it down, and then take the ball here and point it back at the sphere. So now we have the key light is up a little bit higher, like the diagram showed. Then we have the fill light over here and a little bit lower to the camera. And then the next thing we're going to do, if we take a look at this, we have a backlight here that is on the opposite side of our target. It's way up high, so it's about the same height as our key light, and it should be 20% of what our key light lighting is. Now, this is just approximations. Again, this is generalization, and the transfer over to CGI isn't always 1-for-1, but we can use it as a guide. So if I hit 7 here, and if I duplicate this with Shift D, move it over to the back, and again, we're just approximating here. So it should be on the other side of our fill light right here. Take the little yellow ball and drag it over to the sphere. And let's go ahead and name this up here. Double click and call this, we'll actually call it rim light. And spell it correctly, hopefully. And let's turn off the key light and the fill light. And now we have this backlighting effect here. Now, generally speaking, there are some guidelines that people say about using a rim light. Some people like it when it's really sharp and defined, like this. So I just scaled this down. Sometimes you can have it larger and softer. It really depends on what kind of look you're going for. For this one, we're going to go somewhere in between. So it's going to be about here. Um, the weird thing about this is if you scale it up here, the size here doesn't change. That's kind of funky, right? So you may want to do it over here on the right just to make it easier. But a lot of this I do kind of like by feel as far as this is concerned. So I'm going to go about here, about that size. And then again, this should be 20% of our key light. And if we turn on our key light here, click on it, you'll see that that was 2000 watts. So let's turn off the key light again, click on our backlight or rim light, and we're going to type in 2000 times 0.2, which means that it's multiplying by 20. It's multiplying by 0.2, which should give us 20% of that power. Hit enter, and that is what, according to this diagram, you should have for your backlight here for a basic 3-point lighting setup. So let's turn these on, and there we go. There's one more aspect that we're going to add to this, which is going to add generally a lot more dynamic reflections. And by dynamic, I don't mean that it's always changing. I just mean that it looks better. We're going to add a image-based lighting background, or an HDRI, which is also called a high dynamic range image. That's 360 degrees. And what you're going to do is you're going to go on to HDRIHaven.com. And if you get a chance, or if you have some extra money sitting around, $5, $1, whatever it is, donate to these guys or this group. They're really amazing. They have a 3D model haven. They have a texture haven that we'll be using on other tutorials. And they have the HDRI Haven, which gives you free, unlicensed HDRIs that you can use for all your professional and personal work. And it's really amazing, all of the stuff that they have here. They've really done an amazing job with this website. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the studio here. And we're going to choose, where is it? Studio Small One right here. So we're going to click on that, and it's going to take us to another page. And here we go. So it took a little bit of time for it to pull up this page. But if you scroll down, you'll see that you can download all of these different versions. And we don't really want this 8K tone mapped. That's fine if you're doing something with, you know, small amount of RAM space or something like that, or like a video game and you want to use it. But what we're going to do is we're going to use this 4K HDR, which is going to be just fine for us. 16K we really don't need. 8K slows everything down. 4K is pretty good. 2K you start to lose some definition. So let's do the 4K here. And it'll automatically download, and just copy and paste it wherever, whenever you end up getting that downloaded, just copy and paste that into a folder with a bunch of your HDRs that you're going to be downloading from most likely this website or other places. So let's pop back into Blender here. And what we're going to do is we're going to, let me just change this back so that it's more clear what's going on. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to, where it says surface here, you're going to make sure that this surface right here is set to background. And then right here where it says color, you're going to click this and you're going to change it to environment texture. And once we're there, we can click open. You will navigate to wherever you've saved your HDRI, and there is my Studio Small right here. And now we have a HDR background, but remember we turn the strength down to 0. So let's actually do something here. Let's take all of our lamps and we're going to put it into a new collection. We'll hit M here, move to new collection. We'll call it lamps _1, because maybe you want to set up different lamp setups to see how it looks. Who knows? You might want to duplicate these and rotate them or do something else to test out how these things work and try different things. So if we turn these off by clicking this box, we have no lighting. And if we go to our world settings here and we take this strength and we type in, let's say, 0.2, you can see that now we have a environment lighting up our scene. So this helps with showing some more realistic reflections, because in any sort of space, you're not just going to have these perfect lamps that we have here. So if I turn this to 0, you can see how the background has no lighting and everything just seems a little flat. Oops, a little flat overall. So what an HDR does, even if you put it at a point 0.1 for the strength, it gives a little bit of an extra realism to your overall scene. And that's pretty much what we're going for. So maybe 0.05, maybe a point 0.2. It really depends on what kind of lighting you're trying to go for here, but we're going to set it at a point 0.1. And that is the basics of how we're going to light our scene and the lighting setup that we're generally going to have for our renders. Now, as a bonus, I want to show you guys how you can get all of these lamps pointed to the same object and be able to easily move around that object, and then the lights will also move with it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to hide the objects by clicking the box up here and make sure that the 3D cursor is in the center of your scene by hitting Shift C. And we're going to add Shift A and empty. And we're going to choose the plane with axes. And then we're going to hit S to scale that up so it's a little bit easier to see. And if you look over here in our collections tree over here, you see that this is called empty. So let's double click that and we're going to call this light target. And how this works is we're going to apply a what is called a constraint so that the lamp will always point at this empty. No matter where it is in the scene, it will always be pointed at this empty that we called the light target. So what you want to do is you want to select the lamp. You want to go here to the object constraint properties. You want to click here, track to, and then you'll see right here it says target. And you can click this and you can type in light target. So it's right there. Or you can hit this eyedropper and then hover to the object here and then left click. And now it's tracking to it. Now here's the problem. So you can see that the lamp is kind of like shy or something. It's like not wanting to look at our object. Now, I'm not 100% sure why it's automatically set in Blender to do this. It seems a little bit backwards to me, and there's probably someone who knows why this happens better than me. But since this is backwards, we have to actually change the settings over here so that it works properly. So what you want to do is you want to go over here to the object constraint, and where it says 2, change that to -Z, and then where it says up, change that to Y. And now, if we take our empty right here, let's turn off the other lights here. So this was our key light. Let's turn off the fill and the rim light, and let's also turn off our background light here in the world settings. And if I grab this empty by hitting G and moving it, you can see that over here, if you're looking right here, let's actually change this really quick and you could just watch me. I'm going to change it to a spot lamp. It's still not that easy to see. It's fine. You can kind of visualize it. So if you look over here, watch the lamp, and then if I take this and I move it, you can see that the camera or the lamp is moving with the empty. And if we turn on our rim light and our fill light, select our fill light and do the same thing, go to constraints, add a constraint, track to, we use the eyedropper, light target, choose -Z, and then for up, choose Y. It's now targeted the empty. And for our rim light, we'll do the same thing. Add a constraint, track to. You can, let's do a search for the target this time, and we'll type in target and select light target. 2 is going to be -Z, and up is going to be Y. And now all of our lamps will be targeted exactly to the same point, and if we move this target, they will follow that target no matter where we put it. which is pretty fantastic because you don't have to rotate each one independently when you want to change where your lights are targeting. Now let's turn back on our objects so we can see this kind of more in real time. And I'm going to hit 7 over here on the left so I can see the top view. Hit G to grab the target. I'm just going to move it back here. And you can see that the lights are moving in our rendered view over there, which is pretty great. And you can grab it on Z and move it up. Or let's say you want to take this lamp. Let's just say you wanted to take this one and you wanted to move it over here. As you move it, you'll see that the lamp is always targeting that same spot, no matter where you go. So hopefully you learned how to light your scene with a proper 3-point lighting setup. I would probably, if I was going to go for final here, I would probably increase this lighting by quite a bit, maybe make this 3000, which then will take this, and since this is 50% of 3000, it would be 1500. And then the rim light back here, 3000 times 0.2 for the 20% of it, and maybe something like that, and then add your background HDRI back in. And you can see there, now we have a fully lit scene, and our objects now are sort of popping off the canvas, so to speak, and we're getting a more finalized look to our scene. We're not going to play around too much with the textures at this point because we really want to start looking at the render engine settings before we start finalizing our materials. So hold off on that. And I challenge you to go online and look at some different lighting setups that are a little bit more. You can look up, horror scene lighting or high key lighting and low key lighting, and just sort of play around with these lighting setups and see what works for you for your scene. And the really great thing is you can just keep adding new lamp sets. You can call this 3-point lighting, whatever you want to call it, and you can play around with all your different lighting setups. So go ahead and play with that before you do the next part of the tutorial series. And again, if you like the content and you're enjoying this, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below, let me know your thoughts, and I will see you guys next time in the next part. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, and make sure that you hit the little bell icon to notify you when new videos are uploaded. And I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.